Have you ever wondered why you keep on missing the drive shots in pickleball? When your opponent presents you with a golden opportunity to attack them, and you end up driving the ball either too high over the net or down the net, giving away the point that you could have otherwise won. If this is you, and trust me, there are many of us who are just like you, myself included, then keep watching, because I'm going to show you how I analyzed my dual partner's drive shots to learn exact reasons why her drive shots are at times inconsistent, and I'll show you how after making a small change to her technique, she was able to completely transform her drive shots, helping her to improve her consistency. But before I dive into the analysis, I want to talk a little bit about why it's important in pickleball to master the drive shots. Well, first of all, the drive shot is an offensive shot. It's an attack. The main goal of a drive shot is to hit the ball with plenty of power and pace with a low trajectory, such that you're going to cause the opponent to either miss the return or come back with a weak return. So you can capitalize on their weak returns to continue gaining advantage for your team. The drive shot is something that may come very naturally to people who come from a very strong tennis background, and it's also one of the easier shots for them to master. But many of us, including myself, who don't have a tennis background, may find this shot extremely difficult to learn, because mechanically, this is probably one of the most complex shots to master in pickleball. There are so many moving parts to this shot that each requires its own mastery. So if you're struggling with this shot, don't be too harsh on yourself. If this is your first time watching any of my videos, my name is Jiang, and I started playing pickleball just about 8 months ago. And I have no tennis background. I've been on a journey to improve my pickleball game in the last several months. And I spend on average 2 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week to practice and drill on a court. And my goal is to become the best player that I can, and hopefully one day I can compete at a 5-0 level. And if you missed my previous video, I did a breakdown of how the top pro players drive the ball. Players such as Ben Jones, Anna Lee Waters, J.W. Johnson, Anna Bry, and many more. Then definitely check out that video. I'm going to include a link to that video down in the description below. And I promise you, you're going to learn the basic fundamentals about drive shots after you finish watching that video. So in order to understand what's causing my drill partner Katie's drive shots to be inconsistent at times, I asked her to drive 50 balls using her natural techniques. And here I'm going to analyze 3 of the shots, which I think are very representative of how she normally drives the ball. And by the way, what I'm about to show you is the same type of analysis that I do on my own videos after my drill sessions to help me understand where my problematic areas are and how I can improve my own techniques. Okay, so let's take a look at this first example here. We'll just let the video run so we can finish watching the entire shot, and then we'll go back and break it down in more detail. And let's go back to the beginning of the video. So there's definitely quite a lot of things to unpack here. Let me start with what I see in terms of her footwork. I think this is something that's actually overlooked by a lot of people, and is actually very important, because out of all the video analysis that I've done on my own mistakes, what I found was that most of the time when I miss the shots, it all goes back to my footwork. When I analyze anybody's videos now, I always start from their feet and then move my way up after that. Okay, so let's first look at how her feet are moving. Here, Katie actually did a very good job in terms of anticipating where the ball was going to land ahead of time. So she took a step forward with her right foot in the front to get close to the ball so that she can strike the ball comfortably within her strike zone. Now, with her leading foot being the right foot, that's also on the same side as her dominant arm. This actually limits her ability to rotate her hips during the swing. She won't be able to take advantage of the extra power that comes from any hip rotation. You can see that her body starts off facing forward like this, and throughout the whole swing, there's actually very little hip rotation happening. So all of the power really just comes from the swinging motion of her arm. Let me get rid of the markers on the screen. Now, the other unique thing about Katie's swing mechanic is that her paddle is actually almost pointing straight down. Let's see right here, and I'll show you from a different angle, which might be a little bit more clear. You can see right around here. It's almost pointing straight down this way. And her arm swings very similar to a pendulum. You can see her elbow is kept straight throughout the whole swing. And most of the movement really just comes from her shoulder. Now, a little bit of background on Katie. I know she's originally from New York City, so growing up she played a lot of American handball. From her technique here, I can definitely tell a lot of the handball influence has been carried over here to pickleball. Now, because her arm is kept very straight throughout the swing, this is kind of forcing her to make contact with the ball at the point that's much lower than it is for most other people. Right here. And what I mean by that is, if I were to go back in time and see where the ball peaks, this ball peaks around here somewhere. So I'm going to draw a line here. I'm going to call this peak, and I just extend this peak line over here. And based on most of the top pro players I've analyzed in my previous video, you actually see that most of them tend to take or hit the ball at around the peak, or right after the peak. Okay, around this area here. Now this does make a lot of sense, because this is when the ball is moving by the least amount vertically near the peak, making it easier for anybody to time the shot. Now, since Katie is hitting the ball much later, you'll see here she waits for the ball to fall quite far away from the peak, around here. This is actually almost past halfway between the peak and the court. So this is actually quite a low point of contact for most people, whereas most people tend to take the ball either here or here, just to make the timing of the shot easier. Now, by the time the ball gets down in this region here, the ball is already falling at a faster speed vertically downwards, and this gives her a very small timing window to make a good hit, and there's not much margin for error here. Her timing needs to be almost perfect every time. Any slight error in her swing can easily translate into ball moving either too high, or in some cases the ball going onto the net. It's very unforgiving. I'm going to remove the markers again. Another challenge that she needs to deal with using this pendulum style swing path is the fact that it makes it very difficult for her to control the angle of the paddle face at a point of contact. And let's first draw out the swing path. Let's say if she's holding the paddle out like this with a neutral wrist position, where the paddle and the forearm forms a fairly straight line. Imagine if she's holding the paddle in a neutral position like this. Then this area here is where it would be the most comfortable for her to make contact with the ball without either making the ball go too high or go too low, right? Because the angle of the ball going out is going to be something like this. Now, because she is making the contact up here, okay, imagine if she's holding the paddle in a neutral position like this. If she makes a contact here with a neutral rest position, then the ball is going to fly off in this direction, and very likely it's going to go out. So in order to stop that from happening, Katie had to compensate for that by opening up her wrist at an angle like this. So her paddle face, the angle of her paddle face is more closed, and as she hits the ball is going to be going up this way as opposed to going high like this. So she's opening her wrist like this. Let me grab a paddle up like this. But the challenge of using your wrist to compensate for the angle of the paddle face is that you can only open up your wrist so far before you reach the limit. The higher you try to make contact with the ball, the more you have to open up your wrist in order to compensate for the angle of the paddle face. and it just makes it a lot more difficult to hit higher balls. And that's why she's having to wait for the ball to fall way past beyond the peak of the ball before she makes contact with the ball. Again, this just adds another layer of complexity to her mechanics, which already doesn't have too much margin for error to begin with. The more I analyze her drive, the more impressed I get in terms of how good her timing is. I mean, just being able to hit as many good drives as she has been during her practice and reg games with this technique, how she's managed to do that, it's completely beyond me. Okay, so just like before, let's take a look at a second example, and we'll let the video run so we can watch the entire shot, and then we'll go back, break down her technique step by step. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of this second shot again. Now this time again, she did a very good job in terms of anticipating where the ball was going to land. So she took a small step forward with her right foot, and quickly she realized that she needed to close more gap between her body and the ball. So then she pushed herself forward with her right foot and took a second small lunge step towards the ball as she makes contact with the ball. So again, good anticipation by Katie here. Now one thing to note here is that as she took the second lunge step, her left foot is slightly in the front this time as she makes contact with the ball. And this is what's allowing her to rotate her hip a lot more. Pay attention to her hips. This hip rotation is what's going to give this shot a little bit more power than the previous shot. The other thing I thought she did really well was the fact that throughout this entire swing, she took the lunge step forward to meet the ball. There was very little vertical movement or up and down movement. She kept her height fairly steady, which makes it easier for her to time the shot and make clean contact with the ball. Let me just draw a line over her head here. You can see as she approaches the ball, the up and down movement is pretty much minimized, removing another variable. And just like before, I'm gonna go back and draw a line at where the ball peaks around here. And then you see, just like the previous shot, she really waits until the ball falls quite far down towards the court before she makes contact with the ball right here. For most other people, like I mentioned before, or at least most of the pros that I analyzed, they tend to be making contact with the ball around here or somewhere between here to here, this window. And that's when the ball is moving the least amount vertically or up and down. Now let's watch the next shot. I think it's another interesting example. Just like before, I'm gonna let the video run so we can watch the entire shot together. After that, I'm gonna rewind the video back to the beginning. I'll analyze what's happening with her shot. Go back to the beginning right here. So what you'll see here was that this ball was actually quite high. As a result of that, the ball also bounced off the ground quite high, went up to her waist level. Because this ball was high, she had to compensate for this high ball by first getting on her toes with her right foot. Watch right here, she's raising those heels to raise her body height in order to compensate for this high bounce. And by doing this, she's not putting herself in the most balanced position. And in addition to that, you see that this time she actually had to bend her elbow rather than keeping it straight like the previous two shots. So this way, she can raise the height of the paddle even more in order to make contact with the ball, which bounced off really high this time. The other adjustment she had to make here was how much she now needs to open up her wrist. You can see here the paddle and her forearm is almost at a 90-degree angle here. And this is because when she was hitting the ball this high up, if she doesn't make adjustments like this, let's say if she keeps her paddle in a neutral position like this, then the ball is going to just fly off sky high. Instead, she fully opens her wrist to have a more closed angle of the paddle face, and when she makes contact with the ball actually flies out more horizontally towards the net, as you see here, right here. Now, because her wrist, in this case, was probably in a fully open position, meaning she cannot open up this wrist any further, she probably felt very jammed and uncomfortable when she hit this shot. Again, just a very difficult shot to pull off mechanically. Impressed with the fact that she was still able to hit a good drive here with this particular technique. Her margin for error is almost non-existent, I would say. So after hitting the first 50 balls, we took a quick pause so I can spend some time with her to provide some feedback to her based on my observation of how the first 50 ball went. And I provided just one feedback to her to focus on for the rest of that drill session. And I suggested to her to fully focus on turning those hips during her swing every single time. And in order to do that, it does mean at the start of her forward swing, she really needs to turn her body sideways and let her body face sideways more. So as she brings her paddle forward to hit the ball, it allows that hip rotation. So after we finished the quick chat, she went back to the court and hit another 50 balls. And this time, every single ball she hit, she was really just focusing on one thing, and that is to turn her hips during the shot. And I picked two examples of her hitting with this new mechanic, which I think are very representative of how the rest of the 50 balls went. And let's now take a look at this first example after she made this one simple adjustment to her technique. Again, just like before, let's watch the video together for the first time, and I'll go back and break it down in more detail. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay, so there's actually a lot of change that's happening. Let me go through one by one. As per usual, I'm going to start with her footwork. So as she prepares for the ball, she actually now opens out her body to the side a lot more compared to before. The other thing to pay attention to is where her feet are. And let's look. Now she's got her left foot in the front, whereas before she had the right foot in the front. This is the complete opposite of what she was doing before. But why did this happen? If you think about it, the feedback I gave her was to focus on rotating her hips, and the only way to properly rotate her hips without losing balance is really by having her left foot in the front as she hits the ball. So it's very interesting that the one thing that I suggested her to focus on is turning her hips, and in the process of doing that, she's now fixed her footwork by positioning her left foot in the front instead of her right foot from like before. And you can see as we watch how she brings her paddle forward, pay attention to her hip rotation throughout the swing. Watch how she's now really turning those hips during the swing, leveraging the power that gets generated from the hip rotation. Now with this proper hip rotation, this also changed her swing path completely. Before, if you remember, she was pointing her paddle straight down and swinging similar to a pendulum. But watch where she's pointing the paddle now. Maybe take a look from a different angle. Okay, right here. Now she's pointing the paddle much more sideways, whereas before it was more like this. Apologies for bad handwriting. And this is now because her hip rotation is a big part of her swing path. So as she moves her hip around to hit a ball, it would actually be very awkward if she continues to hold her paddle like the way she held it before, which is by pointing it straight down towards the ground. So the more natural thing for her to do now is to hold the paddle more horizontally, pointing it out sideways, like what she's doing. It just comes naturally with that nice hip rotation that she's doing. And as she makes contact with the ball, you see, watch how it's now a very nice swing through, which is very different using her previous technique. The swing path now has a much more diagonal component to it across her body compared to her old down-up pendulum style swing path. Now the other advantage of pointing the paddle more sideways rather than pointing it straight down like before is the fact that it makes it a lot easier for her to adjust the angle of her paddle face. Instead of relying on opening up the wrist or closing the wrist to adjust the angle of the paddle face, she now just needs to rotate her forearm to adjust the paddle face. This also gives her a larger degree of freedom. Let's go back. Now the other thing to know here is that with proper hip rotation being part of her swing path, she can't really keep her arms straight like before anymore, because if she did that, then her contact point would be too far out away from her body, which is generally not a good idea, because typically you want to keep the point of contact not too far away from your body, so your movement can be more compact. And as a result of that, you can see she's now bending her elbow naturally. Move around here. Hopefully it's more clear to see from this angle. And if we look at this shot from a different angle, you'll see the same thing. There's a nice bend to her elbow. And the point of contact is not far out here, and it's not too close to her body. There's a nice gap between her arm and her torso. Another important difference you see here in this shot was when she made contact with the ball. So remember from before, using her old technique, she was really waiting for the ball to go way past the peak before hitting the ball, which makes it very difficult to time. Now if we look at this shot now, and let me just pause the video right around here and draw a line. Now we call this the peak, and now watch where she's making contact with the ball, right here. And this is the area between here and the peak. This is generally the area where I see most of the top pros make contact with the ball when they do their drive shots. If you remember from before, using her old technique, she was making contact with the ball more around this height, which makes it far more difficult to time the shot. And this was all because with the proper hip rotation, it introduces more horizontal motion to her swing path. And with this more of a horizontal swing path, the paddle position has to be pointed more sideways rather than pointing straight down. So she can increase the horizontal real estate for making contact with the ball. Now with her old technique, in order to adapt to the variation in the height of the ball, each time she needs to make a decision in terms of how much she needs to bend her knees, how much she needs to open up her wrist, whether or not she needs to bend her elbow, if so, by how much she needs to bend the elbow. Also, whether she needs to be on her toes or not in order to raise her body height even more. That's just a lot of variables to deal with for every single shot. Whereas now with this new technique, she mostly just has to be concerned with how much she needs to bend her knees and the angle of the paddle face at the point of contact, which is much easier and it simplifies everything for her. The new swing path also allows her to be more consistent with where she's contacting the ball, i.e. at the peak or right after the peak. Okay, so then as she hits the ball, she finished the shot with a beautiful swing through. You can see the hips turning all the way around here. And again, we did not discuss any of these improvements other than turning her hips during the practice. Even if we did, I think it would have completely overwhelmed her. Instead, all the improvements that you saw all came from one small adjustment, and that is focusing on just turning the hips. And I personally feel like a lot of the time we're trying to get better at something, very often we're overloaded with the large number of things that we need to be focusing on simultaneously, and we end up not improving anything at all. And I find it a lot more helpful by spending some time and understanding the exact or specific root cause that's causing you the issue or letting your technique down, then just focusing on addressing the root cause one or two at a time. And a lot of the other issues may just go away naturally because some of them might be just byproduct of the root cause. Once you fix the root cause, then the rest of the stars will align. Now in this next shot, you can see that she slides over to her right first. Again, watch how she positioned herself with a semi-open stance. Her body was still facing the side. Her left foot is still in the front. Great preparation by Katie here. She finished the backswing by the time she got to the ball. Her knees are bent, so she could keep her body low. And just like the previous shot, watch how she was properly turning those hips throughout the swing. And when she made contact with the ball, her dominant shoulder is now in the front. And her non-dominant shoulder is now at the back. Point of contact is in front of her body. Again, her paddle is not pointing straight down like before. Instead, it's pointing more sideways. Let's take a look at this from a different angle. There we go. Pointing this way. Very nice gap between her arm and her torso. Just beautiful mechanics. And she finished the shot with a nice swing through, which looks very different from her original swing through. Objectively speaking, I think overall this was better mechanics than before. It's more simple, and it also gave her more range of motion. All of these improvements were as a result of one simple change, and that is just turning those hips. So my feedback for Katie in terms of the next thing for her to focus on would be to reduce the length of her backswing, make that backswing more compact, a little bit shorter. This is going to help reduce the preparation time that she needs before she drives every ball. Also, with a shorter swing path, it just makes it even easier to time each shot, and hopefully making her drive even more consistent moving forward. I hope some of these things I've shared in this video are helpful to you also, and this is my first time doing this type of analysis on YouTube. Whether you enjoyed this video or not, please take a quick moment to make a comment down below. Your feedback is going to be really helpful and appreciated for a small channel like this. If you did enjoy watching this video, I think you'll also enjoy another one of my most popular videos on mastering the return of serve, and I'll pop a link down below in the descriptions. Thank you for watching. See you next time. 下次再见。